Hey, good evening, and welcome to the first episode of Travel Around the World. Hopefully, you're in your living room. And unfortunately, I'm in the library as opposed to being where I'm going to talk about tonight, and that's Scandinavia. Now, you might ask yourself, what is a guy with a Croatian last name talking about parts of Scandinavia? And the only thing I can tell you is that I've eaten Swedish meatballs, I've watched New Scan cook on PBS, and I have bought various bits of furniture at IKEA. And that's it. But we have today somebody who is fluent in a Scandinavian language, Norwegian, Asta Solie from Wisconsin. Now, if you know anything about the United States, a lot of Norwegians in the latter part of the 19th century came to the United States. And as a consequence, if you go up to northern parts of Minnesota, Wisconsin, you'll notice that they speak English a little differently. And part of that comes from the fact that they came from that part. She has lived in Norway. She doesn't live there. She was not born there. But she's going to be able to give you a few words and phrases in Norwegian and maybe Swedish. What I'm going to be able to do is to introduce some books about Swedish authors and give you maybe a little introduction into Sweden, the country, because it has been in the news lately. In fact, it was just in the news yesterday that they finally decided that they're no longer going to investigate the assassination of their prime minister, which took place 33 years ago and has not been solved yet. And of course, Sweden's also been in the news because of the way they deal with the pandemic, which is, what can we do about it? Go on your own. As opposed to us, I just took my mask off a little while ago. I don't know if Asta has to wear a mask down there in Florida or not, given some of the things that I've seen from their governor in Florida. You're probably allowed to do whatever darn you please. But anyhow, how about telling us hello? And Dr. Javersak really is a handsome man.
Hallå, kan du säga på norsk? Hallå eller hej på dig? Hey på dig is hello as a colloquial or a friendly type of casual. It's a casual greeting. Hallå is the word that you would say to a stranger. And Dr. Javersak, han är så käck.
He's so handsome.
Han är så käck. Han är väldigt...
No, translate. He's so handsome.
Oh, he's so handsome. Han är käck.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who can hear another voice behind Asta, she's at the age where I am, where our children seem to be able to tell us what to do, trying to make up for all the years that we have told them what to do.
Yes.
So, but anyhow, let's begin our investigation of some Swedish literature. And let me tell you how I got involved in this. I'm a member of Costco in Robinson Township. And I happened to be looking at their magazine, and they talked about a book, Man Called Ove. And I said, well, that looks interesting. So I read it, and I loved it. I gave it to my wife. She loved it. And as a consequence, we've got another one, and another one. And there are a few more that we have at home. This is the more recent one. Us Against You. I have not read this one yet. My wife just finished it.
Fredrik.
And then, because that looks so good, I ran across another guy from Sweden by the name of Jonasson, Jonasson, because the title was fascinating. It was The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared. And I bought it, put it on my Kindle, and I thought it was wonderful. A couple weeks after I read the book, I was at a essay club that I belonged to, and the late Dr. Noble, cardiologist, he and I would exchange books. What are you reading? What am I reading? And so on. And I mentioned that book to him, and he must have read it because, about maybe a year later, there's a thing that comes in the mail, and he sends me the updated version, which is The Accidental Further Adventures of a 100-Year-Old Man. If you want something funny, I would recommend this to you. Now, I will give you if you think Donald Trump is the best president we've ever had, you may not want to read this book, because like many people in Europe, this author doesn't. Okay. Now, let me give you a little background about Sweden. Sweden, of course, is a Scandinavian country. The other ones would be Norway, from where Asta is, Finland, Denmark. They are among the most advanced European nations, in fact, nations worldwide. They rank very high in per capita income. They always rank very high in things like quality of life, happy places. In fact, there was a book that appeared several years ago called A Year of Living Danishly, in which an English woman went to Denmark to find out why they're so happy. And Sweden's usually there, Norway's usually there. Sometimes Finland isn't, but that's, I think, because they're too close to the Soviet Union and it's probably rubbing off on them. But per capita income is much higher than, actually it's higher than it is in the United States. We're the richest country in the world when it comes to having the most money. But when it comes to having that money done per capita, we're not as good. And there are other things that we're not as good at. And one of the things that I was interested in, particularly in this time of the pandemic, is life expectancy. Because the United States, we're told, has the best healthcare system in the world. I'm not so sure. Life expectancy in the United States is 78.6 years. In Sweden, it's 82.2. For men, it's 80.3. So that the average man in Sweden has a longer life expectancy than the entire population of the United States. And when you throw in women, women live longer in most countries. 84.3 years in Sweden. Healthcare system is very good. The education system is very good. Okay. Now, it's not that Sweden doesn't have its problems. And if you read any of the books, and there's another author I would introduce you to, too, if you want to see some of the problems in Sweden, and that's this guy, Henning Mankell, Mankell. You may have seen his books or put on television, the Wallander series, kind of a dark view of the Scandinavia. But Scandinavia has problems. And considering what we've gone through here in the United States in the last couple of weeks, racism is one of them. Asta will tell you that a couple of years ago, in Norway, some guy decided that he needed to shoot some people in Norway, which is really unusual for a country like Norway, because they were foreigners. And every once in a while, you'll find in Mankell, you'll find in Backman, you'll find in the 100-Year-Old Man references to maybe we shouldn't allow those foreigners in. Because the Scandinavian countries have taken in people from Syria, other parts of the Middle East. As a matter of fact, one of the people who lives in Sweden, and his name just went off the top of my head, is a man who was just inducted into the Wheeling Hall of Fame last year. He's an African-American. He's 102 years old. Everett Lee. He probably knows Carlson here, Alan Carlson, because they're about the same age. Can you imagine 102 years of age? So Swedish life can be very good. Now, if you're interested, one of the things that I would recommend to you to find about any nation is a source that I used to use when I taught geography at West Liberty some years ago. It's called the CIA Fact Book. And what the CIA Fact Book does is it gives you up-to-date information on every kind of aspect, whether it's geography, whether it's history, whether it's per capita income, disparities of any kind, problems, you name it, it's in there. The most up-to-date information you're likely to find. But remember, Sweden is not a large country. It's about the size of California. And like California, it's longer from north to south than it is from east to west. About 10.3 million people live there. Religion is likely to be Lutheran, as it would be in Asta, if I'm not correct, also in Norway and parts of Denmark, for example. They were very much influenced by the Reformation and work of Martin Luther. So Scandinavia is an interesting place. There are lots of people in parts of the United States with Scandinavian backgrounds, particularly in the upper Midwest, because things were not always as good in Scandinavia in the late 19th century. So they came to the United States, just as the Scots did, just as the Irish did, and just as the Croatians did when my grandfather came to the United States in 1902, for example. But there's another thing you may not understand or remember about Sweden. They settled part of what's now the United States of America. In the 1630s, a group of Scandinavians from Sweden and from Finland, probably more from Finland than Sweden, but it was done under the Swedish flag, set up a colony in what we now know as Delaware. And for about 20 years, there was a new Sweden. And there are some interesting things in American history that you may not realize are of Scandinavian background. And the most obvious, particularly in a place like West Virginia, particularly if you've ever watched a show that we do called Barnwood Builders, that comes out of Greenbrier County, is that it's the Swedes who brought the log cabin to the United States. So as Americans moved west and they built log cabins, they weren't building it because the English or the French or anybody else. It was that Scandinavians. So that influence is there. And I think you'll probably find there are Scandinavian national hockey league players. Scandinavia is also very large in the tourism. If you've ever seen the itineraries for various cruise lines, they will take you all through the fjords in Norway. They will take you into the Baltic Sea. They will take you into the Baltic nations. And the whole thing about Vikings, which is very big, Game of Thrones, the whole thing of that. One of the things that I read are the Vikings that have moved into Ireland in the about the 900s, for example. Now, let me introduce you to these two authors, and we'll begin with Fredrik Backman. Okay. Now, what I find amazing about this guy, he's 39 years old. Okay. And in the last 8 years, he has published 9 books. You know, he's got the Man Called Ove. He's got one here called Bret Murray Was Here. This is a great book, and I would recommend it. Women may like it more than men because what it talks about is how a woman gets out of the shadow of her husband and finds her own life, and how meaningful that life can be and how rewarding it is. Wonderful book. And there's another book that I think my daughter has a copy, but you'll love the title. It's My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. And if you've ever had grandmothers that'll just say what comes to their mind, you see, the wonderful thing about being over 70 is that you do say things that you don't care if people like or not, because you're over 70. And what are they going to do to you? Okay. And that's why when I read Backman's first book, A Man Called Ove, I was like, why do I like this book so well? And my wife looked at me and she said, you know why you like that book so well? That's you. You're a curmudgeon. You're a guy who doesn't think anybody does things the way that you can. You do them better than they do. And so does he. And he's a guy who's gruff, and yet he has a soft spot for animals, soft spot for children. And those of you, I remember once some of my faculty members years ago who thought that I could be a little gruff and my voice was sometimes too loud and too deep and too menacing, watched me with children, and they were absolutely amazed. Because the highlight of Alice and my life in the last 24 years have been grandchildren. How we'd known they were that good, we'd have had them first. We wouldn't have gone through all that stuff with Grant and Meredith that we did over the last 51 years. But this book, made into a movie, it was made into a movie in 2015, I think. But this is a guy that I'll just read you the back of it. He is almost the grumpiest man you'll ever meet, a curmudgeon with staunch principles, strict routines, and a short fuse. People think him bitter, and he thinks himself surrounded by idiots. In fact, I was on the golf course today, and there were two guys playing ahead of us, playing too slow. And the guys I was playing with said, "Are you going to hit?" I said, "Yes, I'm going to hit. If they get in the way, I'm sorry, but they're idiots. They should know golf etiquette." That's what this guy would do. He's Swedish. So when he has to have a car, what's he going to have? A Saab. Why? Because the Swedes made it. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Saab. Saab was taken over by General Motors. And then, of course, we know what happened to General Motors, and Saab now does not exist. Okay. The other Swedish company that you might be familiar with that makes automobiles is Volvo. Volvo is vaunted for its safe, dependable cars. But let me give you a hint. When I was at the last auto show and I was looking at the Volvos, what caught my attention was where they were made. Guess where? China. Because Volvo, I think, might now be owned by a Chinese company. But Backman has been extremely successful. And he will have a new book out called Anxious People in September of this year to add to this. What you have are really a series of different stories. These two books called Bear Town and Us Against You about hockey. Now, if you know anything about Sweden, hockey's pretty important, just as it is in Canada, okay? And to some degree, the United States. But remember, it snows a lot in Sweden. They're not into baseball. They're not into football unless it's soccer, okay? And remember, when you read about things in Europe and they're talking about football, it's not the one with the point on the end of it. It's the round one that we think is that stupid game called soccer, and who would want to play that? That's one series. These, the Man Called Ove and the Bret Murray was here and the grandmother, those are stories of human interest. They're stories about people who are finding themselves, people who are good people, people that you can identify with. who have the same kinds of problems that you deal with. And that's why I think they're successful. Every book that Backman has done been a bestseller in Sweden. And they have now been translated into 25 languages, which I think is an important point to be made. A lot of credit has to be given to the translator, because I think it's probably very difficult. Well, Asta could probably tell this better than I, how difficult it is to translate a book from the language in which it was written to a language that, English, which is not the easiest of languages. So whoever does his books does an absolute wonderful, wonderful job. And I think but 39 years old with 2 kids, lives in Stockholm. But how is that possible that somebody can have that kind of time, that ability to do that? Now, I did run into somebody the other day, a person that I like very much, and a wonderful, respected woman, who said she didn't really like A Man Called Ove. And I said, really? How could you not like that? The Beartown book is an interesting book, too. It's about hockey, but it's about 2 kinds of kids who play on hockey. The kids from the rich families, the families of the owners of the mills, and the kids who are less advantaged, some of whom are also immigrant children. And what happens when one of the good kids rapes the daughter of the coach, and what that leads to, and who's at fault. You see, one of the things that you'll learn, that a lot of the problems that we have in the United States are also experienced by people elsewhere, whether it's sexism, whether it's racism, whether it's drugs. One of the things that you'll find if you read any of the Mankell books, the Wallander, drugs, big issue. In fact, this book, actually, it's the first book, The 100-Year-Old Man Who Walked Out the Window. How it begins is when the guy gets out the window and he wants to go take a bus to get out. It's his 100th birthday, and he doesn't want to be in this old age home where they put him, because there are too many old people there. Now, you may think that's funny, but I remember my father was in his mid-80s, and he was telling me, he said, I don't like to go to that art group. And I said, why, Dad? And he said, there are old people there. I said, Dad, you're 85. He said, but those are older people. Okay. Well, he's not going to have a 100th birthday in this nursing home. So he gets out and he runs into a young man who asked him to watch this suitcase, huge suitcase, very heavy. And, things happen. These are accidental things. And it turns out that the 100-year-old man takes the suitcase, gets on a bus, takes it away. Turns out that suitcase is full of $500 million. From where? From drugs. That book is about it's an interesting book in that it discusses what happens when the guy goes out the window. So it's a contemporary. And you're going to love it, because you're going to run into strange people. You're going to run into a woman who owns an elephant, an Indian elephant. You're going to run into just strange folks, okay? But in between those chapters are all the other adventures that he had as a younger man. And in that book, Alan Carlson will meet Winston Churchill, Joseph Stalin, drinks with Harry Truman, okay? helps with the atomic bomb, deals with Richard Nixon, Dwight Eisenhower, okay, and ends up flying to Indonesia to spend the rest of the money. Now, if you don't see the humor in that, you have to understand that this guy, this Jonas Jonasson, I don't know why I want to call it Johansson, Jonasson, satirical. Now, let me show you this next book. This is an updated version. And let me show you how this one starts. They're in Bali. It's his 101st birthday. And they've almost run through all of this millions of dollars. They've given a lot of it away and other people, but they've run through it. But they're going to have his 100th birthday. And part of the birthday is he wants to be in a hot air balloon. So he gets in a hot air balloon. It breaks free and flies away. Okay? And it runs out of air after a while. It runs out of gas and it starts to sink and it goes down into the Indian Ocean, where it's picked up by a boat headed for North Korea that has some nuclear fusion stuff on it. So in this book, he meets Kim Jong-il, or whatever the name of that crazy fellow is, but he also had met his father. He had also met Mao Zedong. And then in the new book, he will not only run into the North Korean leader, but Donald Trump, Angela Merkel, for example. And let me just read to you one little section. This comes from a chapter called USA. And I want to read you just a couple paragraphs, because you have to understand that if you read contemporary literature that comes out of Europe, whether it's stories of mystery or crime or whatever, they're likely to talk about the strange things that are going on in the United States of America when it comes to politics. Okay? Let me read this. Donald John Trump was born in New York on June 14th, 1946, a year to the day after Swedish citizen Alan Emanuel Carlson solved the last problem facing the United States in its struggle to create the atomic bomb. Alan and Donald had more in common than one might think. For example, both had received inheritance from their parents. Alan had taken over a cottage with no insulation or running water somewhere in the forest in Sweden, while young Donald's father left him 27,000 centrally located apartments in New York City. Subsequently, things went poorly for both sons. Alan accidentally blew his cottage sky high and as a result became homeless. And Donald more or less did the same thing with his father's empire, only rescued from bankruptcy by the help of a number of benevolent banks. Another common denominator was that Donald and Alan had sat around sighing over their existences at more or less the same time, but on opposite sides of the globe. Alan on Bali, before he was bewitched by the black tablet being, of course, one of those tablets, iPad or whatever would be, and let himself be carried off by a hot air balloon, and Donald in the White House surrounded by idiots and malevolent characters. It wasn't as pleasant to be president of the United States as Donald Trump expected. Firing people was just about the most fun thing in the world. And when he did in the business world and on television, he was met with fear and respect. But as soon as he started heads rolling in the White House, it sort of depended on how you counted him, because the corrupt media insinuated that he was mentally unstable. And there are worse things. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. I want to tell you, these are some of the best books that you will run into. You will laugh, you will cry. One of the things that Johnson talks about is, and this I think is, he's talking about progress. And what is progress? So when I was young, I had envisioned progress as a kind of a line that begins down here and gradually increases and gets better. But the more I studied history, I realized that's not the way it works. And that's what this book also talks about, is that it goes in circles. You have ups and downs. Sometimes things are better, sometimes they're worse. We've had good presidents, we've had terrible presidents. We've had sometimes a very good president followed by a very bad president, or a very good president, or a bad president, whatever. And he's talking about, and let me read you what he says. On the whole, the world is a better place than it was 100 years ago, even if progress didn't seem to be happening in a straight line. It seems to go up and down in cycles. And as far as Alan could tell, it was certainly on the way down. The risk was that it wouldn't turn up again before a sufficient number of people for a sufficient amount of time did sufficiently awful things to each other. And after that, people would start thinking again. It had always been this way. But was it so very certain that it would be this way again? Researchers just announced that the average level of intelligence was in a downturn. Alan read that people spend too much time with their black tablets, and have lost the ability to have conversation. I'm reading this as I'm talking to a computer, and on the other end of this computer is, I can see Asta, but who else? I'm not sure. The thing about the tablet was that it intended to talk to its owner rather than with it. As a result, people were going all over the internet and letting others think for them to the extent that they were on their way to becoming stupid. Alan was concerned when he realized that truth was losing ground along with intelligence. It used to be easy to know what was true and what wasn't. Vodka was good. 2 + 2 was not 5. That's why you'll enjoy these books. They're current. They address the problems that we do all have in this world today. And they do it in a fashion that I think is remarkably well done in terms of how these people can visualize these problems and put it into words. I've done a lot of writing in my time, but I can't write like that. My writing is too stilted, or too, it doesn't have that flow to it. And I think you will find these Swedish authors have just a wonderful way of expressing themselves in terms of addressing these problems. And hopefully that's what will be in this whole series. Because we're gonna, we'll be in Scandinavia for a while. And then after Scandinavia, we're gonna go to Russia. I'm not sure we're gonna do current literature in Russia, but most of the literature that we're familiar with in Russia is 19th century, for example. And then after Russia, we're going to go to Japan. And the guy who's going to do that, Joe Laker, I think you will like. Joe is a retired professor like I am, speaks Japanese, and good fellow. He's going to be followed by another guy from Willing Jesuit, who's now in North Dakota State, where no doubt he's run into a lot of Norwegian people in terms of ancestry. And But what I like about Dr. Cox is that when I introduced myself to him years ago, he knew exactly what my last name was and where my family had originated. And that would make him one of the few people outside of my family who was familiar with that, because the Javersak name is not a very common name in the United States. As a matter of fact, I'll go so far as to say that any Javersak that you would run into is either related by blood or by marriage to me. Okay. And then we're going to go to Nigeria, and things fall apart. One of the most important books to come out of Africa, 1958, but Things Fall Apart is a wonderful book. And then on July the 16th, you're going to be introduced to some literature from Australia. And the guy who's going to do it is a friend of mine. We met about 2 years ago, and he and I really, we think alike. He has a Jaguar, I have a Jaguar. I study whaling history. And my dissertation was on whaling history. He's in the University of New South Wales and doing a dissertation on the history of Wheeling, West Virginia. Wonderful, wonderful guy. And that's going to be followed by Lou Volpe from Wheeling Central. And we're going to do a little Italian. Now remember, when it comes to ethnic groups in the United States, for years, in fact, even in terms of total groups, Germans are the biggest ethnic group in the United States. But there was one census year at the beginning of the 20th century in which the Italians displaced the Germans. And one of the big groups in parts of West Virginia, which doesn't have a lot of ethnicity to it. West Virginia is one of the least diverse states. In fact, it's the least diverse state in the United States. But Italians are very big here. And then the final class is going to take you down to Colombia. Remember, this is a nation that's spelled L-O-M. You want to spell it L-U-M, you're talking about the college, the university that's in New York. As usual, Aaron and big guy, Sean Duffy of the Irish background, we put together a wonderful program. And then we're going to end this with a geography bee. And I love nothing better than geography bees. I mean, I've already thought of a couple questions. In fact, I'll give you one now. If it's, what time is it now? It's 7:08. If it's 7:08 in Wheeling, what time is it? It's the same time. We're in the same time zone. We're thousands of miles away. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to have to look at a globe. I hope you've enjoyed this evening. I thank Asta from and she's going to tell us not only goodbye, but you know, you could say that, you know, I did a pretty good job. Or you could tell me that I stunk and I won't know. You say it Norwegian.
Jeg tror du har gjort det veldig godt. Du har vært veldig inspirasjon. Og I said, I think you've done very well and you've been a big inspiration.
Thank you very much.
Og jeg skal si det at, and I'll tell you, det var veldig hyggelig å treffe deg. It was very nice to meet you. Det var veldig hyggelig å treffe deg.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I enjoyed this interchange that we've had, and I I would love to go to Norway. That's one of the places that's on my bucket list. Actually, it's higher than Sweden.
You
Okay.
know, it is more beautiful, to tell you the truth. Sweden is beautiful, but with all the mountains on the west coast,
Right.
it's just absolute. And my husband and I have traveled all over. When we lived in Trondheim, we stuck the kids in the car every weekend. This was back in the 70s. And they were in the car, and we just traveled all over the area. And the people from the lab would say, well, go ask Leland what it's like, because
Yeah.
they knew that we had traveled extensively. But it's been very nice to have a lot of family there, and both of
Right.
our older children have been there. And so we talk to Norway a couple times a month or so with our relatives.
Now, one of the things that's come up on the screen there, I don't know if it's on yours, it says, how do you say I'd like a beer?
Jag vill gärna ha öl.
Is
I would
beer
love
a
to-
big thing in Norway?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay.
Not that I
Okay.
drink it, but
Well, I have a feeling that when I get home, I just may have to wet my whistle. Asta, it's been wonderful to share this time with you.
thank
And
you.
to those who will see this or hear it or watch it or whatever, I hope you enjoy the rest of it. And as ever, it is just the greatest pleasure that I have had in my career to be with the People's University at the Ohio County Public Library, which is run by a former student of mine, Dottie Thomas. And it's a tribute to her and to Aaron and to Sean that we have such a wonderful program. Good evening.
Someone has asked how to say peace be with you. Fred med dig. Fred med dig.
Mad today.
Ha det.
Yeah. Well, yes.
I don't exactly know if there's any difference in saying goodbye in Swedish or Norwegian. Adieu. They use adieu also.
They do?
And adieu or ha det. Ha det bra. Have it good.
Oh, okay.
So
Thank you very much, and good luck with your move to Minneapolis.
thank you so very much.
Okay.
Pleasure being here.
Bye.
Bye now.